Well, thank you, Becky. And by the way, thank you to all my team for helping make this possible. Thank you for everybody for joining. I love that somebody's joining on a train right now. That is commitment. My goal today is to talk through a couple of topics, specifically what gateways do for MCP. There are plenty of folks in the chat who are saying they're not using MCP yet. And the way I like to think of what we do is allow teams to say yes, but with an asterisk with the terms and conditions of how to use MCP safely. And I know a lot of teams are kind of in exactly the same ballpark as those in the chat, where it's just been we're going to stay on the sidelines until we know how to dip our toes in safely. And so we'll cover today how far I think the industry has come on getting to that point, if that's where you are. I'll share more about our perspective on how to evaluate them. This market is growing very quickly. This is very exciting because this is a birth of a new category. I still remember what it was like in the mid 2010s when API technology was becoming really, really popular. And I was out in San Francisco meeting this guy named Agi, which is, the founder of Kong, and he calls himself the godfather of APIs. And that was, I didn't know back then that I was at the beginning of something that was going to be so profound as an impact on our industry. And here we are with MCP, and I'm seeing a lot of the same patterns, and that's why we're here. I'm also going to show you towards the sort of midway point here how our team has approached it. We have a gateway, and I'll explain in detail how that works. I assume that this is a reasonably technical audience, and the reason you're here is because you want to dig in a little bit. I am the architect of our system, and so I have that level of technical depth of understanding why we built things the way we do. And I will say that one of the most interesting things about building a solution here is that we had to toss out a lot of the assumptions that we had when working with APIs because MCP has some unique peculiarities that if you use API-like assumptions and you just think, oh, it's just another, way to connect over REST endpoints in some way, you're going to end up missing some of the major threat vectors. And I'll cover that today. And so I do caveat that this industry is so new and we had nobody's homework to copy from here, so we are generating things as ideas that are completely net new. And this is just one company's and one team's perspective on how to solve it. So I invite you to look at what we're doing, and if you're interested after this meeting or after this webinar, give us feedback on how you're approaching it because we're working very closely with our design partners who, frankly, have turned our roadmap upside down in a good way, as I'll show you in a minute. So let's get into it. Uh, so this is my analogy for MCP today. For those of you who know what this is the right flyer, and there's a lot of analogies. In particular, just like the right flyer, MCP is this breakthrough technology that's going to transform our world, or at least I believe so. And it provides this tremendous advantage. Imagine what our life would be like today without airplanes. But it comes with some risks, especially if you're really early on, and it requires some skill to operate. There's a lot of parallels here. But that's kind of what a lot of the solutions out there look like today. None of us in this industry are yet at the level of sophistication of a full-blown 747 or something more sophisticated, A380, something, more contemporary. But we're getting there quickly, and there are some great benefits to those who get in early. So that's my analogy. I will say, what is at stake here? Why even bother? There are a number of teams that are out there already using MCP to great effect. I like to highlight Block. I'm actually friends with some members of the team there. They've done great work contributing to the specification, and they have been deploying some excellent open source technology. But I think the proof is in the fact that they're finding enough results to be increasing their investment in MCP. Now, they solved and they've been solving a lot of the problems adjacent to what I'm about to describe today. Unfortunate to them, they sort of had this expertise and were able to do it. And we're doing so kind of in the same way to bring this to everybody. But there's a lot of potential here when you connect an AI agent to the world of data and the world of tools. But of course, that's where the issue comes in, is now these AI agents, which are not particularly reliable, can be easily tricked, now have access to sensitive systems. So that's why many teams are saying no. Here's my perspective on this. The protocol simply says how the communication works, but it's still up to you as a team to figure out how it's going to work for you in your organization. The protocol is actually relatively non-prescriptive. Now, this is when I said that our roadmap got turned upside down. This is where I'm referring to it. We thought we were going to approach this from the security perspective, and then from the observability perspective, and finally from the enablement perspective. And when we went into these design partners that were exploring MCPs, what we found was they were still struggling with getting MCPs deployed. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's obviously the most easy ones where you just get a URL, and those are called remote servers. But it gets a little bit more tricky when you have something like Zen MCP or sequential thinking or something that you've got to host inside your data center and then provide securely to your team. How do you do that? The most complicated one is where you actually need to run the MCP on an end user's workstation. And we call these workstation MCPs because it needs file system access or access to the code that they're working on. And these are very valid cases for MCP. And it's an incredible mess, from anybody who's responsible for securing and setting these things up. How do you do that today? And so it's no wonder why so many teams are saying no. Well, we have some technology around that, which I'll get to later, but that's why we inverted our roadmap and started working so intensely on this enablement piece. Basically, make it easy for both technical and non-technical team members to use MCP in all of those settings and help our customers who are reasonably technical but still not MCP experts deploy into their cloud or onto those workstations. The second part of this hierarchy of needs, after you've gotten it to work, then let's see what's happening. Today, MCP does not really provide any type of visibility mechanism in the protocol. And in fact, as I'll show in a minute, it's this really convoluted mesh of servers and clients that provides really no central observability point. And so this is one of those problems for enterprise architects today is how do you gain that observability across all of the clients and all of the servers so that you can at least see what's happening to be able to respond to threats as they may happen or simply understand how your team is using this technology so that you can invest appropriately. Then the cherry on top, I'll say, and not the last and not the least important thing, but in terms of our customers' needs as we're talking to them, then it becomes let's make sure this is secure. Because if you can't get it to work, it doesn't matter even to secure it. And if you can't see what's going on, then you don't really know what you're securing. And so this is how we've settled on this hierarchy of needs, and that's what I'll show you today. In terms of, once again, protocol versus product, the protocol is going to give us this unified language. How do things communicate? This nice vendor independence. As more MCP servers evolve and more clients evolve, your investments in MCP will grow. We've got network effects in this community, and that's very exciting. And well, that's my third point. Onto the right, what is the protocol not going to be able to solve for you? Well, that's your authentication and identity. It says how to do it, but it doesn't provide it. Just like there are things like SAML and OAuth as protocols, but you need something like an Okta to manage that internally, so too do you need products to manage the identity and authentication for MCP. Enterprise operations around getting audit trails, observability, compliance. That's going to, I think, be very big in 2026, by the way, is making sure that you have proper compliance guardrails in place for processing user data, especially whether you have the consent to do so. And then infrastructure. It's still up to you to set up your MCP servers. This is that web I described. I assume that everybody on this call could see why this is not a great thing to manage. This is something where MCP is unique and I dispel many notions of how things work. Some folks tend to think that MCP just sits on the side of the LLM and it's accessed when it's needed. In reality, if this whole stack that I'm showing on the left is all of the context that's sent to the LLM with every call, all of the MCP metadata from the servers, which I'll show you live later in the demo, actually is included in those requests directly, which means, number one, just like you would not want SQL injections running in your SQL queries, prompt injections and issues in here basically run and get executed in the same context as your system instructions and your user message. So that's where the risk comes in. But also, and there's not a lot out there in the world about this, it increases your cost. If these are big metadata, like Notion's server provides a tremendous amount of metadata, you're paying for those tokens. This is not free. Latency, when you add more context, it causes the LLM to take more time to process it. And then accuracy, there are some good studies out there that effectively show that when you inject extraneous, not useful information to the LLM for what its job is, it'll actually pull it off course a little bit and reduce its accuracy. And so there are many, many reasons why you want to get a handle on this metadata. I will provide these analogies for you of why it makes sense to have a gateway. I think we'll kind of get there, but just like with SMTP and IMAP, teams aren't building this themselves. You need Microsoft 365 and Proofpoint. Once again, these are just protocols. SAML and OAuth, we're using things in the industry like Okta and Entra ID. Git, we've got products like GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket. APIs, we have things like Kong and MuleSoft to manage them. And my proposal to the sort of industry today is that the same thing is true with MCP. It's a new protocol, but it's not a product in and of itself. So this is my architecture concept to present to you as what the ideal enterprise setup for MCP is today, where this sort of like mesh of things being connected, this web is now simplified down to having a central gateway in the middle, which of course comes with some pros and cons, but this is the central control point where now an enterprise can see and control what's happening. And it provides a tremendous amount of control to be here in the middle, including deciding what clients can connect, what servers can connect, what data can flow through. To Ray, who was talking in the comments about, masked sensitive PII data to different agents, this is where you could do that type of operation of detecting and masking or hashing sensitive information as it goes between your servers and your LLMs. So the table stakes here are effectively enablement, make it easy for your team to use MCP, this identity piece, composition, effectively bringing multiple servers together and deploying them as one logical server, feature filtering, logging, token management. I'll boil this down to an even deeper level right now. So for those of you who are in the market today, considering making decisions, I've got a bit of a checklist coming for you right now, and I'll go in depth. And right after this is when I'll go into the demo. But I wanted to show you what are the things that are good as far as our definition is MCP Gateway has to have for you to consider it to be, deployable today. Well, first of all, you're going to want a server registry, a set of what are the servers that our company has approved for use internally. That's a really important starting point. Many teams today either don't have that or are doing it ad hoc in documents. But this provides a central place if your gateway does this. Next, providing a client allow list. Your organization might not want to use ChatGPT, or they might want to use Claude. Whatever clients you're allowing, a good gateway should allow you to effectively set policies on where those MCP gateways can be connected. That's a second part of this. So once again, both sides of that ecosystem providing those governance controls. The next part of any, I think, useful gateway is something that allows you to take the capabilities of multiple servers, sort of cherry pick the capabilities inside them because they're typically way over provisioned for what you need, and then expose them as gateways, or they might otherwise be described as virtual servers, so that you take all these capabilities and you just expose it to your LLM as one with just what it needs to do the job. The next thing is connection ease, especially for non-technical MCP users. Remote MCPs are the easiest ones, and a good gateway will generally just give you a URL that you could plop right into any place you're going to use it. Whether you're creating an agent with code with a TypeScript SDK, in which case you've got a URL and an auth token, very easy, or you're dropping it in some type of client like a Claude Code or a VS Code. Observability is also, I think, table stakes, being able to effectively, at that control point, see all of the data going through. And as I'll show you later, the way we're collecting it, you can collect obviously the bodies and the headers and all the basic things you would imagine for that traffic, but you could also collect things around latency. You could collect information around which users in your organization or which agents were on each end of that. And that gives you a lot of power to then understand that data. Moving on to the more advanced features. MCP capability opt-out is the idea that, MCP as a protocol is growing in capabilities very quickly. And I use that word capability as a sort of vocab term to describe things like tools, resources, and prompts, which are provided by the servers. And of course, on the client side, you have things like elicitation. But I'm primarily focused right now where the industry is on the servers themselves. And so if you don't want to provide resources or prompts to your agent or your humans because it's not relevant, it might be helpful for you to opt out of that. So that's another thing a gateway should help you do. Headless agent support is the next thing. There's really two ways to connect to an MCP server when you have a remote URL. I already said this before, but just for the point of this particular line item, you want to support what's called DCR, Dynamic Client Registration, where you drop in the URL and then effectively, getting very technical here, the MCP client tries to access the URL, gets a 401, it comes back with that. And now the client goes to a well-known location, literally, finds the address of the OAuth server, and then effectively does the handshake there, gets the token, and sends it back. Anyway, a good gateway will handle all that for you. And by the way, I didn't put it on here, but token rotation is also an important part. It's a tricky part, and you got to get that right so that those tokens you get remain active. But on the other side, you've got the headless agents. So as I'll show you in our demo today, the OpenAI agent builder does not support DCR because it actually generates code for you at the end of it. So what it does is it requires that an auth token, effectively a bearer token. And so a good gateway is going to give you both options for headed or headless connections. Next, there's a lot here. Metadata locking, effectively being able to see what those MCP servers are trying to put into that context stack that I showed you earlier, and the ability as an administrator to look at that and approve that and potentially lock that so that it can't change. Or if it does change, it stops to function and it doesn't provide those vectors for things like prompt injection and server mimicry and shadowing. And there's just so many problems that result from that. Also, as I'll get to in a minute, that's where we save things like cost and latency. So just doing that one little capability has so many benefits. Moving on is bring your own identity. Identity is the sort of the big topic that's popping up right now too, is, okay, I've got this MCP server. How do I make sure that those accessing the server are, what I came up, bringing their own identity? So if they're accessing our Notion server, how do we make sure that they're only seeing things in Notion that they can, or an agent is only getting access to what it needs or has access to? That's really hard and important, and a gateway should help you do that. Support for workstation MCPs. I'm not aware of anybody else in the market today that's doing this sort of in production like we are. We came up with something clever here. I give a lot of credit to my engineering team on this, where we're effectively putting them in containers with tunnels and then making them accessible through the gateway. So sometimes it'll even make a round trip to our, your cloud gateway and then back to the user's machine. But that's really the only architecture I think that makes sense here. From a centralization perspective. So as an advanced feature, assuming you have developers that need these on workstation MCPs, a good gateway is going to have that. Moving on to the enterprise features, the last one, 3 of 3 here. But you're going to want SSO support so that if you deploy this to your broader team, they can go in and get the gateways that you've provisioned for them. You're going to want enterprise logging support. For example, having OTel compatible logs get sent downstream to a collector. You're going to want that configurable RBAC so that you can basically control who gets access to create gateways and assign them. You're going to want configurable rules. Once again, back to that really prescient comment earlier around detecting and blocking PII or secrets. I mean, you could achieve quite a lot with a regex these days, even just looking for like AKIA, AKIA, for those of you on the Amazon stack. That'll help you immensely. And then lastly, and getting real-time alerts, tapping you on the shoulder as the administrator of this when there's something that you need to take action on. Wow. Okay. I'm going to take a breather for myself, a glass of water, but that's the sort of set of things that I believe today are sort of the state of the art for an MCP gateway and the things that you should be looking to expect. So let's do a demo next. So here's how we've approached this problem. So I'm going to start just with a quick lay of the land on the nav bar here. We're on the reporting. In addition, this little section here provides a real life, in fact, I'm going to bump up the size for a moment. This provides a real diagram of how the gateway works. You've got your MCP servers, bidirectional data flow through a gateway, apps and agents on the other side. Pretty simple. You've got your ability to manage your people, manage your logs, and some basic settings. I'm landing here on the reporting page, and this is also something that we've done in deep collaboration with our design partners so far, answering questions like, how many apps and agents has my team connected to? What's the most popular server being used internally? What's the least popular server? Maybe we can nix it. Um, who's making the most feature calls or using the most tokens? What does our activity look like? So you could detect spikes in terms of call counts as well as token counts. What's the latency of these MCP servers? What's slowing my, system, my agents down? We've got the P95 and the median here. Server popularity, error codes, response codes. We're constantly adding more here based on work with these customers. But this is all just pulling from that log data. We collect really rich log data and then crunch the numbers as necessary, but it provides a tremendous amount of wealth of information for making decisions on that. So let's go into the flow as though we are setting this up for the first time. Now, obviously, this instance has some data in it. So here I'm going to show you back to what I said earlier. This is the registry of sorts. These are the servers. And with RBAC, you can make it so that people could submit servers, but they don't go live until an administrator has effectively approved them or reviewed them with this little enabled toggle here. We support three different types, all of the sort of OAuth, the token, and the open servers. Open servers are just like websites practically with the MCP protocol. Token servers, you have to just come with a bearer token for the identity, and OAuth supports that beautiful DCR flow I described earlier. A little bit more sophisticated, but that's the way that your SaaS solutions, for example, like Linear and Notion, are going to treat this. If you're providing your own first-party MCPs, this is an area of deep research in the industry today. In fact, I have a prediction that's probably not even a prediction, it's probably a reality, that there are going to be far more internal MCP servers than external MCP servers in most enterprises. This is also where you would kind of manage that. And I can imagine this page getting quite sophisticated over time as that happens. But at the end of the day, the way we have approached this problem is by bringing everything into the gateway as a streamable HTTP MCP server. And so when we deploy onto the cloud solutions, what we call managed MCPs, we wrap it in such a way that it comes out of the server as a streamable HTTP, which is, by the way, generally what I would call the recommended format. We're moving away from SSE as a protocol, even though there's obviously legacy support for it. So that is on that side. And even on the workstations, we do the same thing, no matter what the internal format is. We're exposing it out as a streamable. We can go in here and get a little bit of detail on them, but I really want to get into the gateways next. What it's going to do right now, it's going to load up some of the data specific to that server. So here I can see what's going on in Notion land. I can manage the identities that people have come in. I have full admin access to do so. Can review the features, see what gateways are connected, and do logging. What's under here will probably become even more abundantly clear as I go in and set up our gateway. Let's set one up together. The best way to show this is to kind of start from scratch and just connect it. So I'm going to create one that we're going to connect to Claude and the OpenAI Agent Builder to show both of those different flows. And so we're going to come in here and create it. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to say this is the webinar demo for 1025, or sorry, 2825. Now we're connected here to this sort of like team setup, which will come in from your SSO system through a sync if necessary. But effectively, this is how you provision gateways to specific groups of users. That's part of the way we've designed this platform. So if a contractor logged in using your SSO platform, they'd come here and instead of seeing all the gateways, they would only see the gateways that they have access to. They'd only be able to connect to those gateways. So this is how we handle enablement. I'm just going to give it to everybody for now. Great. Save that gateway. Okay, so we come in, this gateway is empty. There's nothing here. So let's start provisioning servers into it. This is that composition perspective. So the first one I'm going to add is Notion. So I come here to assign a server, and I'm going to add Notion. Now this particular choice that I'm making here is very unique to the way that we've thought of this problem. I expect that the industry will probably do something very similar in general, but I can either require that each user connecting to this gateway is asked to bring their own identity to the Notion server, which would kind of go through the Notion OAuth flow. Or in particular cases, you might want to have a bot account for like an agent and a shared identity that everybody uses. It just depends on your scheme of choice. In this particular case, I'm going to require each user to use their own identity. Now, this is where I get on my soapbox. This is kind of fun. The world of MCP is so different from APIs because there's no common set of capabilities that you could depend on receiving. There's no open API specification or Swagger. It's not like you can guarantee that every time you connect, you're going to get the same stuff. So you've got to throw out all of those assumptions. In fact, like I described earlier, when a client first connects to the server. It'll probably get a 401 if it's got this authentication. Then you have to come in with an identity. And guess what? The server is completely capable of giving different responses of what capabilities it has to different identities, which we're not seeing a lot in practice today, just to be clear. But architecturally, if you're designing or building a solution here, it absolutely has to understand this and treat this natively because a couple of things, some very valid uses. I might have different capabilities than a colleague of mine, and so there's no reason for me to have tools that I can't use and vice versa. And so we're going to definitely see differentiation along those very valid means. But from a black hat perspective, if I had taken a different path in life, what I would be doing today is producing an MCP server that for the first few identities in the first few days was completely innocuous. It was doing something really valuable for the industry. And then either based on a trigger of time or the number of identities that had connected, I would then start responding with different metadata that was malicious and extracting data. And so what you have to do when you build a system like this is take this into account. Okay, all of that said, back to the demo. What we're going to do next is we're going to effectively select an identity to sample what capabilities it has. This is how we've solved this problem. So I'm going to select this identity that I connected, and I'm going to see all of the tools that Notion brings in for us. Now, we have three choices. I could either block all tools if this was just supposed to be a resource server or a prompt server. But in this case, we've come up with this way to effectively pin the tools through an MCP native style format. So if I select that, right now I've got no provision tools. So this would still be seen as an empty server if I connected it. But what I now have is the ability to go through and opt into the tools that I would like to provide through this gateway. Now I'm just going to sample this for you to see how long this metadata is. And if I go back to that slide before, all of this metadata is costing you tokens. It's potential surface area for injecting, malicious prompts. It is going to slow down the LLM by a little bit, but still it's going to slow it down and it might decrease the accuracy overall. It's just unnecessary. It's not like, for human colleagues, they show up on day one with access to every tool that your entire company has. You give people what they need. And it's the same thing for MCP today. So let's go in here. And I think the one I wanted to do was the Notion search. So I'm going to select Notion search. Now we're only showing a subset of the metadata. If I click on this, we'll show you the full metadata of everything that's going to come through. So this is what the LLM sees when it sees this tool, so it knows how to call it. And so going back here, the way we've decided to approach this problem is to allow our customers to select which of these values they are going to require to match when that handshake happens for this tool to go through the gateway. You can think of this like a filter where the server says, hey, I've got this tool. In fact, it has a handful of them, 15 of them, but we're only going to let through those that match this filter. So I'm going to lock it in by both name and description. Now, depending on your threat model or however you're approaching this, you might say, hey, I generally trust Notion. I just want this to be locked by the name. And whatever they change the description, they might get better descriptions as they tune things. I'm okay with that. That's totally up to the customer in this case. In this case, I want it to be locked. What I saw, I read this, it's safe. Now I have exactly one provision tool, the Notion search. I am going to go down and turn these things off. By the way, this was that capability filtering. There's no need for me to allow resources or prompts for what I'm doing today. All right, rolling back up. I'm going to do one more. Let's go through and do let's do the GitHub one next. GitHub's a little bit different. In this case, there's a shared identity I'm going to use, and this one is an identity created by one of my colleagues. And actually, earlier today, when we were preparing for the demo, we saw that the tools had actually changed since we had last built the filters. And so that was really interesting to see live in practice what we talk about. There was a period in time where GitHub, I think, had over 107 tools. Then it was 47, and now they're down to 40. So you could tell that they're changing these things. But if you lock something in, at least you're confirmed with what you'll get. And in this case, I'm only going to allow if conditions are met. And I believe the one that they just renamed it to is issue right or something like that. Yep, that's the one I wanted. And you can see this one has a tool title, which I could also lock. So now I've got all three of those choices. We are locked and loaded. So now we've got that, and I'm also going to turn these guys off. By the way, you could see, I believe Notion had resources and this one has prompts. We're going to turn off the prompts as well. So we don't need that. All right. So now we've got effectively 2 tools and 2 servers ready to go. And now we can start connecting this. So I'm going to go back to here. This is how your end users would come in after you've done all this work and just grab this URL and connect it in the various places. So let's do that together. Going to Claude, we're going to add a custom connector. I'm going to call this the webinar demo 10/28/25. Paste in the URL, click add. Now what's happening behind the scenes? Claude's contacting the server, getting a 401, and that's why I've got this connect button for me personally. Anybody in my org would also get this connect button. Now this goes to the MCP manager DCR OAuth kind of flow, which I'm going to show you here. Now in this case, I'm going to confirm that I want that same gateway. And here, got a very interesting thing to share. This is where that identity selection I made earlier comes into play because the gateway comes batteries included with that shared identity. But now at connection time, I am going to be asked which identity to Notion to use. So you can imagine just dropping this link in an email and sharing it to 100 people in your org, and each of them would be asked when they connected it to connect to their Notion so that they only had access to Notion or whatever tool it was in your ecosystem. So what MCP Manager is going to be smart enough to do is effectively step-by-step out any of those requirements. I only have one now, so that's why I've got one box to check. But I could either select an identity that I have or that's shared with me. For the purpose of the demo, I'm going to go set up a new one. So I'm going to select add a new identity just to show you what this is like. It goes to Notion. It allows me to say, yes, I trust this, and continue. Now we're doing the beautiful, elegant OAuth handshake dance where that token comes back to MCP Manager. It's going to land me on the page for this identity. By the way, remember when I said it'll become clear under the servers where we go? Well, this is a specific identity tied to a server where it's learning the features actively, and I can see what its availability is. So if I go back here, now that identity automatically popped in, I'm going to select that one, move forward with the connection, and here we go. So I now have set identity for GitHub coming in. The Notion one is set, and I can allow that. We're connected. That tab closes itself, and Claude is going to go ahead and take a look at that. And you can see those 2 tools came right through. Pretty cool. That was as easy as that. Let's do something a little bit more sophisticated, though. More challenge. Let's head on over to the OpenAI Agent Builder. So you want to add tools through this new system where they allow MCP servers. And now what they're asking for is a access token. So let's go see how we can handle that with the gateway. So here I come to the connection tab. So once again, go to my gateways, pop in here, go to connections. That's the connection I set up just a moment ago. You can see that's in here. By the way, as an administrator, I love the ability to just break glass and stop something. So everywhere in the product, you'll see little toggle buttons to turn things off. So if I toggle this off, that connection is severed. If I toggle off Claude, any Claude connections are severed. If I toggle off GitHub, any GitHub connections are severed. Any type of sort of part of this connection scheme can immediately be turned off. Even the identities, the users, that way you have complete ability to effectively turn things off in case of an incident or somebody departing the team or something like that. All right, I'm going to add a new API access token. This is where I assign it to a specific agent. So I'm going to select the OpenAI Agent Builder. And now we're going through that flow again, the one that we did when we dropped the URL inside Claude. But in this case, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to end up, let's see, I'll select that identity. Here we go. And at the end of the day, I get this auth token that I could drop in, copy. So I'm going to take this URL, go to the agent builder, paste that in. We're going to call this the webinar demo. And I'm going to go grab that token, copy that token, and I'm going to connect it. So what the OpenAI agent builder is now going to do is going to go do that handshake, and there the tools came through, and I can continue building. And if I were to effectively preview or publish this with the agent builder, it would generate code in the TypeScript SDK that has that token effectively available for me to put into the secrets. Okay, we've done it. We've now connected to both a headed and a headless flow. The last things that I wanted to show in the platform before we leave, let's go back home. Let's go just chat really quickly about the apps and agents. Once again, you can see all the places we've connected. You have the ability to toggle them off. If I go into people, we can really quickly take a look at roles. We do have a configurable ability to set different roles and tie those to different users and capabilities. And here's how we're envisioning the capability list today. The member can basically just submit servers but not enable them, and then connect to the hosts effectively with the gateways, and they get the gateways that are provisioned based on their teams. So if I go back to teams and I select the default team that's going to have the most, you're going to see all the gateways that that team has, and I could come in here and provision more gateways to that team. So everything connects. Okay, I think we've got everything. Oh, I didn't show logs yet. Let's go take a quick look at logs before I go. Now, preferably you're going to send this to your collector, but if you really want to inspect, you can come in here and see all the richness of the data that is coming through. We're getting everything, including the headers and the bodies and the response times and all the identifiers. We're getting latency from the servers. This looks like this is a high latency operation, whatever that was. And you can see just all the traffic back and forth with the MCP server. Now, what's particularly clever, I didn't get a chance to show you this, but by looking at this, you can kind of do sort of like almost packet inspection operations where you look for PII going in and out and can do all sorts of clever things to block that. I think there's going to be a lot more innovation in that particular spot of effectively, when you're in the middle, being able to see and control that data. Okay. I think that is the full demo. Let me check my list. Yeah, we got everything. All right. Let's wrap up. So just in total, we've got enablement. Does it work? Yep. You could see you could drop the URLs in. We've got some observability, and we've got some security, specifically around monitoring the metadata and being able to lock that in. That gets you a long way. And then more sophisticated things in the future coming with being able to detect things in that sort of middle ground. And then in terms of ROI, well, how do you figure out what the ROI of a platform like this is? Well, beyond just generally being able to say yes to MCP, there are some things that you could very directly track. Risk reduction for potential threats, LLM cost reduction of those tokens. Once again, remember that Notion metadata that was so rich? If you only needed 1/10 of that, now you've got a 90% reduction in those tokens. And we have found, based on our research, that the MCP metadata is usually many multiples larger than the user prompt that's going in. And so that's the bulk of your cost. That's the place to focus. The next is agent accuracy improvements. Once again, if you are asking a human to solve a problem and you give them some extraneous information, they'll probably just look at you funny, but still figure it out. But agents in vector spaces, things are a little bit different with how they work, and that extra context could theoretically pull them off or confuse them a little bit. And then in terms of speed improvements, sometimes people ask, like, what's the latency of your gateway? Are you going to slow things down? And what we've found is that there's generally a net reduction, actually, because when you're reducing the context, you're speeding up the execution. We're typically operating on the order of milliseconds, whereas the LLMs themselves are usually taking an order of magnitude larger, if not more. And so the performance impact usually nets out positively in our favor, but it depends on how much work you're doing. For example, if you're going to run a Microsoft Presidio look up for PII on the traffic, obviously that's going to slow things down, but that's just the cost that you would have to do the analysis on where you want. So that is where I'll wrap things up. I wanted to put this up on screen for those who are here now or will be watching this later on the various platforms we posted on. If you'd like to book a personalized demo, ask some special questions, my colleague Dimitri, our senior product manager, would be happy to do that. You could do that by following this link. And if you mention this webinar, I know getting access to things can sometimes be a really great way to understand them. We are running a small little promotion where if you've joined the webinar and you've seen this, you can get a week free. We don't generally offer that. It takes a little bit of time to handhold people and set it up, but we're happy to do it for anybody who has been on the webinar and invested this time with us. So I'll pause there. I'll hand it back off to Becky, but thank you all for joining, and maybe we'll have some questions. I'm not sure, Becky, how you wanted to wrap us up. Depends on what guardrails you're talking about, but if you're talking about things like detecting PII or just simply other types of data, that's where you add the filters. I didn't get a chance to show that. Um, but yeah, it sounds like PII. It's not yet in the product today, but I think it's going to be a couple weeks out. Is the Microsoft Presidio Direct integration, where you'll be able to configure Presidio, which is pretty good at detecting these types of things that are like not regex based. We have a regex solution kind of already in place for basic things. But I actually plan for this to be a slightly more extensible system where you could even build your own filters at various steps and just provide a URL, and there will be some custom format that you just respond with from that URL. So we might send it to you. You respond and say allowed, disallowed, alert, redact it. You can modify the payload. That's I think where this type of solution goes in the long term, is that extensibility.
Awesome. And yeah, I think there's also a question around pricing for the design partner platform. I know that, we usually talk about that during a 101 demo, although I feel like the pricing is pretty accessible for the.
Yeah, I would say I'll directly. I don't mean to be evasive about it, but it does depend a little bit on the extent of our engagement, how many servers you're planning to deploy. But it has not been a prohibitive factor for anybody that has come asking about that. Usually, we're talking about the four figures for a design partnership.
Awesome. And one more question, does the MCP gateway, will it have the ability to see the request and response?
Yes, it does. That which is where the power comes in being able to inspect those requests and responses and be able to take action on them.
Awesome. And yeah, I definitely, encourage people who have more questions and specific use cases in mind to book with Dimitri. We are so happy to go over what you have in mind at your organization or on your team for rolling out MCP. And we have been working with a lot of teams on this, so we've seen a lot of different types of deployment strategies and are happy to kind of impart our knowledge and chat with you to see how you can do so securely and with observability. So super excited. And Ray, great looking product. Thank you, Michael. Awesome. Thank you so much for the positive feedback. I'm happy to hear that people got a lot out of this webinar. I put the URL to Book Time with Dimitri also in the chat. We have a blog and a YouTube channel, so make sure you also
I
um,
will also pump that, by the way, and not just because it's ours, but our marketing team giving a shout out to Becky and James are surprised. Like for a marketing team, they can go toe to toe with some like high level engineers on how MCP works, and are helping our engineers put out a high quality content. Not just about like understanding MCP, but we've got a great GitHub with some open source utilities to help you deploy MCP servers, some checklists to use internally. I think maybe if James or Becky, you could throw that in the chat as well. That's a great resource, and we're continuously adding to that. And they don't have to only be used with our platform. Those are just generally useful things for deploying or evaluating solutions.
Totally. Yeah. If you go to MCP Manager, our website, click on resources, we have a sub nav of our GitHub, our
Mhm.
blog, our past talks we've given. There's like a lot there. I think
Yeah,
there's like, we have
a
a
lot of there's a
checklist.
lot of
Yeah.
R&D. I was going to say that's the fun part about this. When we were able to get the single command to effectively from your machine deploy to a cloud environment the MCP server and have it connect all the way through, that was a real triumph for the team to do that in one command. It's quite fun. So anyway, it's great to be in this ecosystem this early and where there's so much greenfield opportunity to invent things. So yeah, for any the watchers or joiners today, if you like cutting edge stuff and want to participate in that with us, that's where the design partnerships can be really really rewarding and fun, because we're building based on what our customers need and say. And that was one of the requests, was want an easier way to deploy my MCP servers to my cloud environment, and we got a one command run.
Totally. Yep. It's been a lot of fun working with our design partner. So yeah, hope to hear from some of you. And in the meantime, keep in touch. Check out our resources that we have. And yeah, if you're interested in rolling out MCP, definitely book a call. seems like we have concluded with the question portion of this, and I really want to give a thank you to everyone who attended today. Definitely know how precious all of our time is, so thank you so much for spending yours today with us to learn about MCP and MCP gateways. But yeah, thank you, and I will wish you a wonderful day. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.